We haven't had much music about these two wars, have we? I'm not aware of how that's being dealt with in protest songs and so forth, but I'd like to know more about that.
I would too. It's a provocative question.
Yeah.
It's certainly not as central to our time
Mm-hmm.
as it was during the Vietnam War.
Song was that? Where Have All the Flowers Gone? Was that Peter, Paul, and Mary?
Might have been.
I mean, that was a powerful song during the Vietnam War. You know, Where Have All the Young Men Gone? The lyrics.
But you're still active in the arts.
Well, still, writing poetry, serious, morbid, dark poetry, funny, superficial poetry. I like to write both. Sometimes the two are combined. It's interesting to sneak deep meaning into cutesy forms, to catch a reader in a sense, unawares. And I think that's where Dylan has done a good job sometimes with his lyrics to engage people's consciousness and wake them up.
Yeah. Do you have a good concrete example? Something come to mind right away?
Well, the answer is Blowing in the Winds. What was the rest of that lyric? I can't remember the rest of the lyric, but he's asking a question there, what's happening. And pay attention. The answer is Blowing in the Winds. Just to be conscious, pay attention, listen, learn what's happening in your country. For Apocalypse Now, didn't they use a lot? They used a lot of rock music on the soundtrack of that, very effectively and very powerfully. But it just made me realize that I'm not aware of any good new songs that have come out of the Iraq War or the Afghanistan War. There's got to be something going on out there. People writing stuff. I was listening to some old songs recently about World War I even. There was, of course, some of them was patriotic, popular songs, but some of them had a dark side, a questioning side. And even the song Lily Marlene, I don't know if you know that old song, it had a poignancy to it. And it was a German song, but became popular on both sides during World War I. And express some of the poignancy of the lonely soldier and what's going on for them. So I hope graduate education includes some of these trends, popular culture. And I'm not as familiar with graphic art, although recently, because of a trip I made, I began thinking about Picasso's Guernica. I don't know if you know the painting Guernica or what Guernica was. But that was the first time in history that military planes bombed a civilian population, the town of Guernica in Spain. It was the fascists supported by the Germans. And Picasso made a huge painting about as big as that wall, maybe, of that bombing. And that changed consciousness there. And there was a lot of graphic art having that effect as well.
We keep hearing this idea that if you want to know what's going on in the culture, don't go to the psychology library.
Because it's not tuned in. So
Yeah, you look to the arts.
Look to the arts and to the popular, current arts. And to popular music, but then also to film.
I noticed you came back with a rock in your hand. Maybe you'd like to tell us what it is.
It's a piece of granite. A very small piece of granite from a granite quarry at the Nazi camp Mauthausen in Austria, which I recently visited. And it was a granite quarry, and the prisoners were marched down 186 steps, something like that, down into the quarry, carry these rocks and collect them, and then carry them back up the 186 steps. And I went partly, I had never been to a concentration camp. I thought, I think everybody should go once and see what it does for them, to meditate on it or learn about it. Intellectual, factual content, emotional content, or whatever, and what are the implications for the future and so forth. And so I went, and no way I was going to climb down those 186 steps back. I'd climbed down about 20 or 30. But I brought back a piece of granite, which I intend to keep the rest of my life as a sort of reminder or memento of the camp. And then I did write a set of poems about the trip to Mauthausen. And I could read one if you'd like me to do that.
Please.
Well, there's 6 of them. I won't read all 6 maybe, but pick one here. Well, I'll just pick the first one, called Going to Mauthausen. Today I am going to Mauthausen concentration camp, not as a Jew, gypsy, homosexual, resistance fighter, Spanish Republican, Polish intellectual, Russian soldier, not even as a guard or liberating American, but as a mere tourist who will spend just a few hours there, which I recommend as the best way if one must go at all. I'm wearing a black coat and hat and no stripes. I have good walking shoes. I will walk carefully by the cliff, named the parachute jump by some jocular guard, down into the quarry. I plan to carry a small piece of granite up those 186 steps of death. After a few hours, I will leave, but not through the electrified barbed wire like the doomed Russians trying to escape. Then my life will go on as I think about all the camps, even today, which one cannot so easily leave. So that's one of the poems. I don't know how many of these we have time for me to read, but
You could do another.
maybe pick one more. I'll just read the next one. It's called Parachutists. Can you enjoy a sick joke? Calling them the parachutists was a clever guard's way of lightening up the grim scene when prisoners sometimes jumped or were pushed off the top of the Mauthausen quarry. At least they were spared the climb down and back up those steps, carrying blocks of granite. And none of them had their own arrogance to blame like Icarus. When my time comes to jump or be pushed, I hope I can pretend that I'm a willing parachutist, enjoying one final thrill. And then there's several others that I won't go into now. But it's one way of my processing the experience of being there. And then I made a trip to China. There's a set about that. And then other poems appear in this book. This is a mixture of humorous poems and some rather dark or self-exploring poems. And the last poem in the book is a tribute to Rollo May. And that's the existential concept of the void, what we do about emptiness or meaninglessness, and words against the void. And you could ask that of psychology. If psychology is confronted with a chaotic, meaningless, absurd universe, and then how do we fill it? What do we put into it? And how do we fill it meaningfully and in a way that's enriching and a real tribute or celebration of humanity? And what way do we just make a lot of words and noise and concepts that Shakespeare's phrase, much ado about nothing, are full of sound and fury signifying nothing. I forget the phrase. So here's me or some poet or some existentialist standing on the cliff. Oh, and it has a quote here from Kenneth Burke. Men build their cultures by huddling together, nervously loquacious, at the edge of an abyss. And so there's the abyss. And in a sense, that's what psychology does. We create concepts and therapies and research and publications trying to say, well, this is what human beings and the human enterprise and civilization are all about. And we know something that can help with that and make it more humane or more, quote, healthy or whatever. And that's what psychology is good for. Well, are we doing our job, and how do we evaluate?